Hey everybody, so today we are going to start working on block 9. So if you haven't already, I'd recommend going and doing the first 8 blocks and watching the get started video if you've not watched all that. And if you're doing the butterflies, you can kind of do them as you please. But I digress. Let's talk about block 9 today. So this one's really pretty. As you can tell, the past couple of blocks we have a lot more of this more floral shapes going on. So after we do this one, we are 3 blocks away till finished. So let's get our supplies together for what we need today. So as usual, I'm going to recommend that on hand you have a good pair of scissors for trimming and you have some embroidery tape on hand. This is the Embroidery Perfection tape by R&K Distributing. I really like those. And then this is a nice pair from more duckbill scissors. You can use them without the duckbill. Or, I'm sorry, these are Gingers. Okay, I'm crazy. But I've used I've used Ginger, I've used Westcott, a little bit of everything. But just have a good pair of curved scissors to trim with. You're going to want to have your threads on hand. You're going to want to have your instructions and all of your fabric. So let's talk about our threads first and foremost. So for our quilting and all of our piecing, I have used ES 165 through the entire duration of the quilt for all my quilting and piecing. For the yellow, I'm going to be using 763 today, and it's just going to do this nice little detailing here. I'm using ES 266, and I'm just using it for the detailing that's going through this part right here. And then ES 956, that is going to be the detailing here and here. So those are what we're using our colors for today. So I'm using a grand total of 4. You can use more, you can use less. That's just a matter of personal preference. I'm just sliding my spools of thread over to the machine real quick. Alrighty, so let's talk about fabrics we're going to need. So there are 4 fabrics that we're using in today's project. I've got my fabric clips here, so let's talk about where goes where. So fabric 1, which is of course your background, are going to be here, 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 and here. Fabric number 2, which is your green, is going to be here, here, and here. Fabric 3, which is your yellow, is only going to go right there. And your fabric 4 is going to go here. So let's talk about how many pieces and what you need. So as I just kind of pointed it out, but here's your diagram. It's going to be right there on your instructions for you. And of course you have 2 different layout options. So you have the on-point layout option where you would make the quilted butterflies, or you have the 4-patch layout option. So if you're using the cutting instructions for 1, be sure to flip over to 4 if you're doing the 4-patch layout. And if you're going to be making 5 because you're doing both layouts, you know, just add an extra one to it. If you want to look at the first one, just quadruple it, however works best for you. So because I make 1 block at a time, we're just going to kind of talk over here. So for fabric number 1, you're going to need several pieces. So let's grab fabric 1 real quick. And of course you need your batting. We'll talk about that in a second. So for fabric 1, you are going to need 1 large piece. So depending on what size you're doing, if you're doing the 5-inch or the 8-inch, the sizes will vary. I'm making the 8-inch, so I'm going to be talking about this size. But you're going to need 1 piece that's 2.5 by 6. So I've got a long piece right here. You're also going to need a 1 piece that is 5 by 8.25, which I've got right here. And then you're also going to need 2 squares cut into half square triangles. So we had 2 4.5-inch squares, and I just cut them in half from corner to corner, and that made our 4.5-inch half square triangles. So you'll have a total of 4 half square triangles on hand when you get started. So that's going to be several pieces of white that you're going to need on hand before you get going. I do recommend having all your pieces cut before you get started. Now let's give a gander at fabric 2. So you're going to need 2 pieces 3.5 by 6.25, which are these larger pieces that I've got right here. That is what's going to create your leaves. And then your stem, which is 2 by 4.5. And it's going to go right there. And it is an applique piece, and you've got to lay it down a little funky. We'll talk about that during the video. Fabric 3, all you're going to need is just basically a little 2.5-inch square. Its only spot, of course, is right there. And then lastly, let's talk about fabric 4. So you'll need a grand total of 2 pieces of fabric 4. You're going to have one at a square, which it's showing here is 3 3/4 by 3 3/4. So I probably would cut this at 4. I always try to cut my stuff a little bit bigger, especially like with those half square triangles. I probably cut those at 5. That's just me. I like to cut a little bigger. So right here we have another piece of fabric, 3 3/4 by 6.5. So if you want to cut this 4 by 6.5, I'd probably recommend that as well. It's always better just to have it a smidge wider. I'm a big fan of that. So I've got all my pieces of fabric here. Another thing that you're going to want to have on hand if you are doing the optional Vanish Light, you're going to obviously want to have that on hand. If you are doing the optional quilted back, you are going to need one piece of fabric to either 9 inches or 6 inches, depending on the size that you're using. And you will need one piece per block. So if you're doing all 5 blocks, because you're doing both layouts, you'll need 5 pieces. If you're doing the 4-patch layout, you're going to need 4 pieces. So just how many pieces you need for each block. If you are doing the optional wool, you are going to need to cut it basically 8 inches by 8 inches if you're doing the 8-inch, and then 5 by 5 if you are doing the 5-inch blocks. Now, if you're doing the battleizer, you're going to go ahead and get that cut and put into your hoop size that you are using. I am using no-show mesh stabilizer, and then I'm using my remains of either my 100% cotton or my 80/20 cotton poly batting blends. So if you are using my method, you need to go ahead and have a piece of stabilizer, no-show mesh specifically, hooped up and ready to go. If you're using the battleizer, you want to go ahead and have that hooped up and ready to go. If you are doing the optional quilted back, you also want to have a couple of empty bobbins on hand, because for each of the steps with the detailing, if you're wanting that color to remain the same color all the way through, you're going to want to have a bobbin wound of it. But if you're wanting to change your colors to match your top threads, you're going to have some partial bobbins wound out of those for your color changes. We'll talk about that as we switch through, and I'll point out where you might want to have those changed. But if you've got all your stuff together after you've gathered all your things, go ahead and move over to the machine. One thing I don't think I've really showed out is the optional layouts. On the back of all of these quilts, she gives you some optional layouts, like other layout possibilities. So if you wanted to make like a 4-patch of this block, you could make several, and it creates this quilt right here. So she's going to have those on the back page of all of the instructions for the month by month. So I don't think I've shown that off yet, so I just wanted to point that out. So I'm gathering all my stuff, and we're going to move over to the machine. So if you have not, go ahead and load your design onto your machine. I, of course, am working with the 8x8 size. So it's going to be, the design size is going to be 7 3/4 by 7 3/4. Same thing if you were doing the 5x5, it's going to be just a smidge smaller. It does show you on the first page of the instructions the actual size of the file. We're going to have 31 color changes at the speed that the machine is currently set to. It's going to take us about 13 minutes to stitch out, and there are 7,258 stitches. So if you've got battleizer hooped, if you've got no-show mesh hooped, whatever it may be, you are good to go as far as that goes. If you are using the Vanish Light thread, the optional Vanish Light thread, you're going to want to start with it in your needle and your regular embroidery thread in your bobbin. So I have my regular embroidery bobbin thread in my bobbin. I also have on exquisite thread color number ES165 because I am not doing the optional Vanish Light. But if you are doing the optional Vanish Light, you want to go ahead and have that in your needle before you begin. Also, I am starting out with a 9014 embroidery needle. That is my preferred for projects like this. So we're going to go ahead and hit start, and we're going to sew directly onto the stabilizer. So no matter your thread, no matter your batting selection, you're going to want to sew that directly onto whatever you have hooped. And that will be machine stitch step 1, of course. Now, if you are doing the optional wool, is the only time you are really going to do machine stitch step 2, because it does a very heavy zigzag stitch. So if you were doing the optional wool, you'll want to go ahead and cover all those outline stitches. You'll lay it over top of that just like I am right now, because I am doing batting as opposed to the battleizer. Now, if you're doing the optional wool, you'll go ahead and do machine stitch step 2, and they will recommend that you raise your embroidery foot height, just because you'll be going through some thickness and they don't want the foot to catch the batting. But I am not doing that, so I am skipping machine stitch step 2, and I'm actually going to go back and repeat machine stitch step 1. I prefer doing the straight stitch as opposed to the zigzag stitch. If you've seen me do the zigzag stitch in prior videos, it's not like it's a problem. If you did that here, it's not going to hurt anything. It just kind of creates a little pucker at the very end of it all, and I don't like that. I also think it's, whoops, I should have taped, but I didn't. I'm just going to go back a few stitches. I also think that the zigzag is a little bit, where it's a little bit heavy, because you're supposed to be going through it, because you'd have batting on top of batting. It does get a little heavy, which is fine, but I don't want that thickness, because I'm going to be adding an extra additional piece of batting where I'm not doing it as quilt as I go. I'm going to be adding the piece of back at the very end. Okay, so if you're doing the optional wool, if you're like me and you're doing the batting on top of stabilizer, you're going to want to trim the excess just close to the stitches. And I should have taped, but you know, hindsight in 2020 and all that. Okay, so again, skip step 2. So if you went back like I did and repeated machine stitch step 1, make sure you are skipping machine stitch step 2. For all of you that are using the Vanish Light, you could go ahead and change that now, or you could change it after you do the next step. The choice is yours. But somewhere before you get to machine stitch step 4, you are going to want to change to a background thread color. So we're going to go ahead and hit start, and we're going to sew machine stitch step 3. And this is going to just give us the rough outline directly on top of the batting of where we're going to place everything. So again, for all of you people that are using the optional Vanish Light, please change it either before you did this step or after you do this step. So just before you start machine stitch step 4, change from Vanish Light in your needle. And of course, for no matter what you've been doing, you are going to have regular embroidery bobbin thread, depending on your manufacturer specifications for weight. Like I've got in 60 weight embroidery bobbin thread in the Avenir right now. So while we're letting that stitch out, you can go ahead and start getting your first piece of fabric together. So we're going to start with fabric 1. We want to grab our long skinny strip. I believe that's even what the instructions call it, is your skinny strip. So your 2.5 by 6.5 piece, you're going to want to go ahead and grab that. So it's going to start right up here at the top. There is a box. And again, be sure to change your thread before you do this step to your regular embroidery thread if you have not already. So we're sewing over this box. We're going to make sure it's face side up. And we're going to extend beyond the edge of the batting by a bit, because I want to be able to trim when I'm done, and I want to cover all my stitches on the inside. We're going to hit start, and we're going to sew machine stitch step 4, which is going to tack down our very first piece of fabric. Don't worry if you left a pretty decent piece up top. You're only going to use it one more time, and the instructions told you to cut a pretty generous piece. Okay. So once you have your first piece tacked down, a fabric 1, you're going to trim 1/4 inch away from the bottom and the 2 sides. You're going to leave your top overhang alone, just like we have with all the other blocks, but just roughly I shot 1/4 inch. And again, you're going to need that remaining piece of fabric, so make sure it's on standby. You'll need it soon. And then go ahead, if you had to remove your hoop like I did, and return your hoop back to the machine. Now you're going to need your one sole piece of fabric 3. So just your little fabric square right there. So go ahead and have it. And you are going to place it to where it is covering our first piece of fabric we laid down. And we are going to align the raw edges with one another for our flip and fold. And then you're going to hit start and sew down machine stitch step 5, which is going just to tack it down for the flip and fold. Perfect. And then if you've got a roll and press or a fabric folding pin that you like to use, go ahead and have that on hand. We're going to flip that down and we're going to give it a nice firm finger press. Okay, we're just going to lay that down nice and smooth, and then we're going to sew machine stitch step 6, which is going to tack down our piece of fabric 3. I swear when I'm like machine stitch step, I feel like I'm getting tongue-tied every time I say it. Okay, so now that you've got that piece tacked down, you're going to go ahead again and trim about 1/4 of an inch away on all 3 raw edge sides. Just eye-shotting it. Just a rough 1/4 of an inch. Perfect. Whoops, I keep hitting the camera. All right, so now that you have that piece laid down, you're going to go ahead and grab the remainder of your fabric strip that we had used prior. So that 2.5 by 6.5 inch piece you used for the first placement, go ahead and grab the rest of it. You're going to take and you're going to place it over top of your previously sewn fabrics. And you're going to kind of, where you had the overhang earlier, this little bit of overhang I've left, I'm going to put it level to the top of it so I have overhang on this side of the hoop as well. We're going to put the raw edges of both pieces flush with one another, and we're going to hit start and sew machine stitch step 7, which is just going to tack it down for the flip and fold. Once it's nice and tacked down, we are of course going to flip it over to the other side. Give it a good finger press to the best of your ability. Again, if you have issues with that, I do recommend either using a roll and press or a wood iron, maybe a fabric folding pin to help relax the seams. Then we're going to hit start once again, and that is just going to tack it down here on the bottom edge. It, like most of them, it does leave some of the outside raw edges exposed till it does that placement line where you have the option to put on your optional back. So once it's done machine stitch step 8 and tacked it down, then we are going to remove just the bottom. So I'm going to just kind of pivot this a bit so I can trim, and we're just going to cut again roughly 1/4 of an inch away. If you had to remove the hoop like I did, go ahead and return it to the machine and get ready for your next piece of fabric. Okie dokie. So now you're going to need fabric number 4. So we put down 3, here's our 4. So we are going to go ahead and grab our smaller piece. You're going to want the square, not the rectangle. So once you've got your square, put my labels back on, you're going to lay it right here, and you're going to put the raw edges even with one another. So just like before, where I want it to overhang, I've kind of made sure this is hanging off the hoop, but I've also made sure it's coming down far enough to cover this bottom line that's been sewed onto my batting. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit start, and I'm going to sew machine stitch step 9 so it'll tack it down so I can do my flip and fold. Now we're going to flip it over. We're going to give it a nice finger press just to hold it down nice and smooth. And we're going to hit start and sew down machine stitch step 10. It is going to create that kind of petal effect. Perfect. Great. So now once again, we're going to trim away roughly at 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to kind of turn the hoop to where I can get my hands in there. And I'm going to trim 1/4 of an inch away, roughly. Okay. And then the same on the bottom side. So On the 2 raw sides that you have, just trim roughly 1/4 of an inch away and return the hoop to the machine if you had to take it off like I did. Perfect. Now you're going to grab one of your mini half square triangles, so you should have 4. So we're going to go ahead and grab our first half square triangle of the day, and we're going to lay it over top of our previous sewn piece of fabric. So we're going to lay that over that piece of fabric 4 we just put down, and we're going to lay the raw edges even with one another, and we're going to sew machine stitch step 11 to tack it down. So you're always going to lay it down over your previous sewn pieces of fabric. Well, but where you need to put it may be different, so just keep that in mind. So once that one has been tacked down, you're going to go ahead and flip it over just like you have everything else. And we're going to crease it and just give it a good finger press over, smooth it down nice and flat. And then we're going to sew machine stitch step 12, which is only going to tack it down on the side. Oh, I think I knocked my thread out of the needle somewhere, some way, somehow. Let's go back to the beginning of that step. Okay. Okay. So again, we're only going to trim on the side. It just tacked down. We're going to trim about 1/4 of an inch away. This one's got a nice opening area, so I don't have to take the hoop off today on this one. So let's just trim roughly 1/4 of an inch away. And then now we're going to move down here to the bottom half. Oh, make my screen go where it needs to. So you're going to grab your remaining piece of fabric 4, and you are going to lay it here where the raw edges are even with one another. I recommend having the overhang for the most part on this side of the hoop, but you want to make sure there is a stitch line right here in this crease. You still want to make sure that that fabric number 4, whatever you've chosen to put there, is going to cover both. You want it to overhang on the outside area, and you want to make sure that it is going past this stitch as well. Now we're going to go ahead and sew down machine stitch step 13, which is going to tack it down. Perfect. So once again, we're going to flip this back. We're going to smooth this down. Trying to move the camera where my arm's not in the way every 5 seconds. I've got this new cabinet and I've just not gotten used to it yet, girls. All right, so once you've got everything nice and smooth, now it's going to come and it's going to create the rest of that kind of bottom of the flower effect. We're going to go ahead and hit start, and we're going to sew down machine stitch step 14. And that was important because you wanted to make sure that you were going to have some overhang right there. Oh, excuse me. Okay, so once again, we're going to trim 1/4 of an inch away. Okay. And I'm going to trim 1/4 of an inch away there. Now we are ready for our second of our 4 half square triangles. So grab your next piece of your half square triangle fabric, lay it once again with it over top of fabric 4, put the raw edges up with one another, and sew machine stitch step 15 to tack it down. Great. Then we're going to flip this forward. Give it a good finger press. Try to smooth it down really nice and firm. If you need to use tape, please use embroidery tape. And then hit start to sew it down with machine stitch step 16. And like always, it does not get the outside edge. It only does the bottom. So once again, we're going to go ahead and trim roughly 1/4 of an inch away. And since I've kind of got my top created right here, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of pieces of tape down. So I'm going to put one right here to hold that nice and flat. I didn't get that tight as I wanted it. There we go. That's better. I'm just doing this now so I won't have to worry about it later. Just want to tape down all of my edges so when my foot comes around it here in a minute, it doesn't accidentally catch anything. Ooh, I had to go into a sneezing fit. Okay. Ooh, bless me. Gosh. Okay. Okay, so now that I've got the hoop locked back into place, we're ready for our next piece of fabric, which is going to be fabric number 2. So we're going to leave this one. It's actually going to be the last piece of fabric we put on. So we're going to put the clip back on it just so we remember that it's fabric 2. We're going to set it to the side, and we're going to grab one of our 2 long pieces of fabric number 2. Again, it's going to go all across this bottom edge right here. And again, you want to make sure it supersedes beyond the previous stitch line over here, and then you want to have the bulk of it hanging over. You're going to put the raw edges flush with the previous raw edges, and you're going to sew machine stitch step 17 to tack it down. Whew. Allergies are killing me today, y'all. Okay, perfect. So we're going to flip this down. We're going to smooth it down nice and smooth. And then we're not actually going to tack it down anywhere. We're going to go ahead and immediately grab our second large piece of fabric too. And we're going to put it all down the side right here. So let me pull my hoop out a little bit so you can see. So I'm going to put it with the overhang up top. I don't need these to really overlap or anything because it's going to start sewing right here. So I'm just going to lay it down right there. It's got some overhang at the top. It's got some overhang on the next piece of fabric. We're good. And we're going to slide that back in and go ahead and sew machine stitch step 18, which is going to tack it down for the flip and fold. Now, just like before, we're going to flip it over and we're going to smooth it out with a good finger press. Alrighty, so now that we have that down, it is going to kind of sew like a weird little angled box around these two. So just want to make sure that those are laying nice and smooth before you sew this next step, which is machine stitch step 19. Perfect. So I'm going to just remove that real quick so I can trim. So I'm going to start here on this long end and we're going to trim roughly 1/4 of an inch away. And the reason I'm starting here is because there's a lot of bulk here where there's all this overlap. And then sometimes, like when I was doing this, I noticed that like when I did my 1/4 of an inch seam, see right there, I've got a little bit of that pink orangey layer. I'm going to trim a little bit of that bulk out of there just to make it lay a little flatter here in a minute. Then I'm going to leave this little flat part alone, and I'm just going to come up beside of it and trim 1/4 of an inch away. Did you see what I'm saying? I'm leaving like the little spot right there because it does blunt off. It does cover it, but I'm paranoid, and I don't want to accidentally cut anything that I need to be there when I go to trim. So we've trimmed 1/4 of an inch away all the way around. We're going to go ahead and we're going to pop this back on the machine real quick. And we're going to go ahead and get our next half square triangle piece ready. We're going to put it up top here over top of the previously sewn piece of fabric number 2. We're going to put the raw edges even with one another. We're going to hit start and we're going to sew down machine stitch step 20, which is going to tack it down for the flip and fold. Perfect. Go ahead and flip that previous piece back, that one it just sewed back, just go ahead and flip it back, smooth it down, and if you want to, go ahead and you can add a piece of tape or two to it because it's about to do the tack down stitch all the way around the block here in just a minute. Okay, so grab your last half square triangle piece, and you're going to put it again over top of fabric 2 on the opposite end, and you are going to put the raw edges flush with one another. You're going to hit start and you're going to sew down your tack down stitch, which is machine stitch step 21. And it came up and out of my needle. I swear I move my hands around in here so much that I just know it's me grabbing and moving and pulling, and I'm just pulling it straight up out of the needle. Perfect. Let's fix that. Fantastic. Good deal. So now that we have that tacked down, we're going to again flip over. Flip it over. Smooth it down with a good, nice finger press. And I'm going to put a couple of pieces of tape on that just to go ahead and hold that down because, again, that all the way around tack down stitch is coming up here in just a second. Okay, so you're going to grab your last piece of fabric, one. You're going to put the long edge up against the angled edge of your hoop, of your block, on your hoop. So you want to cover pretty much from corner to corner. Putting the raw edges even with one another once again, and you're going to go ahead and hit start and sew machine stitch step 22, which will tack it down, and then you'll flip it over just like we've done with all the others. Now we're getting to the part where we're going to talk about switching the bobbins and adding the optional back again. Forgive me, just one more second. So we're going to flip this over real quick. And it is going to go ahead and stitch this corner, and it's also going to stitch the placement stitch for the first piece of applique. So let's go ahead and let that stitch out real quick, which is machine stitch step 23. Let that corner stitch down. Perfect. And then, like I said, it's going to come back over here, and it is going to stitch out the outline for our last piece of fabric, which is fabric 2. Okay, so what I would recommend doing is going ahead and switching to your green thread or whatever thread color you have chosen to be the stem of your flower block. So I am using Exquisite thread color number ES956. Give me just a second to switch that around. I was thinking we were at the optional backing spot, but I'm like, no, we're not quite there yet. Okie dokie. So now that you've got your thread changed, go ahead and lay your piece of fabric 2 down, your very last piece of fabric. So we're going to be trimming this close, but do you notice here how it's kind of got like this little triangle shape? It's actually not going to have you trim any fabric here. If you can notice by the stitch, see how that is? So it wants you to have this overhang here at the bottom. So what I would recommend doing is just kind of putting the end of this even with the previous fabric line. I just kind of took it up to where they're kind of flush with one another, and just of course make sure you've got overhang on both sides that's covering the stitches, and then you'll have a good bit of overhang down here at the bottom. But once you're done, go ahead and stitch it down with machine stitch step 24. It does a very heavy tack down stitch, and then it's going to do a really nice satin stitch all the way around it. As I said a minute ago, we're not going to trim at all on the bottom. So let me pull this up to where we can look at it. So see, it catches right here if you just put it flush. It actually pulled it down a little bit, but that's okay. But we're going to leave all of this alone, and then we're just going to cut as close to the previous stitch line as possible without necking our stitches. We don't want to nick our stitches. So just trim nice and close, and you are done. Go back and redefine any edges that you're unhappy with how close it got. Go ahead and pop that back in the machine, and you're going to go ahead and stitch out your machine stitch step 25, of course, in whatever color you've chosen to do your decorative stitch with. I would have went ahead and put your thread in. I swear I am pulling that out of the needle like something fierce, and now I've lost my thread. It's me today, guys. I don't know what's with me, but I am knocking the thread out of this sucker left and right, and I've been doing it all day, and now I've done something crazy. Charles is going to have words with me. There we go. Much better. But like I was saying a moment ago, go ahead and have in whatever thread you want to do your decorative stitch with, your nice heavy satin stitch, in the needle before you tack the fabric down. So if you are doing any method whatsoever, you have had in the same bobbin the whole time. Now once we get done with the decorative stitching, that is where we're going to start putting on our optional back. So for those of you that are going to be using the Vanish Light after we finish the decorative stitches here, we're going to switch back over to the Vanish Light. We're going to want to go ahead and have our optional back on hand if you're doing the optional back, and you're going to want to have tape to make sure that you're able to hold it down on the back side. You're also going to want to go ahead and start changing your bobbin colors to whatever threads you want to quilt with and be shown on the back side if you are using your optional back. If you were like me and you are doing the back at the very end where you're putting it all together and then you're going to add an additional optional back and a piece of batting, then don't worry about any of that. You're going to have the same bobbin in through the entire duration of this affair. Okay, now that that step is over with, the next thing it's going to do is it's actually going to run like a blanket stitch. It does a bean stitch on the outside and inside of that satin stitch and like a little blanket stitch in between them. If you want to change your thread color for this step, go right ahead, be my guest. That's going to be for machine stitch step 26. I didn't necessarily want to have a color change and a heavy color saturation here. What I decided to do was to go ahead and leave it the same color. And the reason being for that is because I think it just added like a cool textured look to the stem as opposed to like a colored saturation. So either is fine, it's a matter of personal preference. Where this is a multi-shaded batik, I could have easily looked for like this lighter shade of green in here, and that would have looked just fine. But I decided I wanted it to just kind of have, like I said, that textured effect. So for all of you Vanish Light users, go ahead and switch to that in your needle right now. For all of the people that are doing the additional optional back, go ahead and add that to the back of your hoop right now. And for people like me that are doing it without the Vanish Light and without the optional back, you're going to want to go ahead and change your thread color back to your background color. So I am changing back to Exquisite Thread Color number ES165. That is either, if you were not doing the optional back, just going to tack all your pieces down and give you your trim line. It's going to do all of that for you if you're adding the optional back, with the added benefit of tacking your back down for you. So if you have not added tape or want to add additional pieces of tape to hold everything down nice and smooth, I recommend going ahead and doing that now. But be sure that you are watching this and it is not grabbing or flipping anything that doesn't need to be flipped or grabbed as it goes around. And this is machine stitch step 27. Perfect. So now that we have all of this nice and tacked down, we're going to go ahead and begin quilting. So if you did put in the Vanish Light thread, make sure that you're going to go ahead and change now to the color that you want to quilt with. I am using ES165, so I'm going to go ahead and let my quilting start. If you are doing the additional optional back, you want to go ahead and make sure that you have in the bobbin of the color you want it to be on the back side for the quilting step. Again, this is where it does the feathers. So go ahead and make sure that that is in your bobbin. Also, before you begin sewing, they always recommend that if you are doing the bobbin changes, to go ahead and bring your needle down and back up to pull your bobbin thread up to the top to prevent thread nesting. So every time you change thread colors, they recommend doing that if you're doing the additional optional back. now that we're getting to the end of the quilting, let's talk about what it's going to do next. So basically, it's just going to run a kind of like a bean stitch or a run line, whatever you want to call it, all the way through the outline of the petals, the leaves, and the little main centerpiece of the block. So there's going to be just a quick run stitch of each of those. If you are changing the bobbins as you go, where you want your colors on top and your bobbin to be the same, I'd go ahead and have about a quarter bobbin wound of all three of those colors, whatever you want them to be, wound and ready to go, because we're going to be starting changing that in rapid succession right now. So again, I'm going to go ahead and change threads. I'm going to switch over to ES 956 exquisite thread number. And the reason I'm changing to that is because we are going to be doing the detailing in our green leaves. So again, if you are using the optional back and you want your bobbin and your top thread to match, go ahead and change your bobbin as you're changing your thread. Go ahead and hit start and stitch out machine stitch step 29. And it's basically just working its way from the bottom up. And one thing I guess I should have mentioned too, if you are not changing your bobbins and you want the back to be the same color all the way through, don't worry about it. Just leave your bobbin in as it is. And if you were like me and you were adding your backing after, not as you go, you just leave the regular plain old embroidery bobbin in throughout the entirety of the project. All right, so we're ready for our next color change. Again, for those of you with the optional back, you'll want to change that here as well as your top thread. So we're going to go ahead and switch to our red, or whatever you guys are using for your petals for the big part of your flower. I am using exquisite thread color number ES266. And we're going to go ahead and stitch out machine stitch step 30 just to do that cute little detailing through it. And you guys are almost to the finish line. We just got one more color change after this. Okay, so we're going to switch over to our very last color. Again, those of you changing your bobbins to match your top as you go, go ahead and change that now as well. So I'm switching to exquisite thread color number 763, which is like a brighter yellow, to go through my little bitty part of the center of my flower. Oh gosh, don't know what I did there. Gonna have Charles look at that in a minute. But we're almost done, so not right now. So let's go ahead and stitch out machine stitch step 31 together, which is just going to create, like, it does it kind of at a diamond shape as opposed to like just a standard outline like it's done with all the others. And I'll kind of do a little close up on that block here in just a second, let you see. So it does kind of just like a little diamond outline as opposed to like a true outline of it. But there you go. That is block number 9. Go ahead and trim that down either at a 1/2 inch or at a 1/4 of an inch, whatever you prefer. The pattern manufacturers recommend a 1/4. I'm doing a 1/2 just for the sole fact that I am going to be adding the back at the end and I need to piece all these together. And it is easier for me to press open a 1/2 inch seam as opposed to a 1/4 of an inch. But just keep that trimming consistent as you go, guys. We'll see you guys back for block 10. Happy sewing. Have a great day. Bye-bye.